news from Guyana, the region, and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
A very good morning to you with the news at this time. I am Tiana Jordan. The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. To begin the news, here's a look at the lead stories. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU plus AFC coalition government, David Patterson, accused the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board of failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts. APNU and AFC are still to settle unresolved issues, causing rifts between the two coalition partners. And regionally, Grenadian parliamentarians are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana and allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held under better conditions, the head of the European Union's observation mission said on Tuesday, but declined to say if the vote was free and fair. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return-to-work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU plus AFC coalition government, David Patterson, says the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board, NPTAB, continued failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts breeds corruption. The former Public Infrastructure Minister says NPTAB since 2017, under the APNU plus AFC coalition administration, was given an obligation on the tender board to conduct due diligence.
Under the coalition term from 2017 onwards, in response to efforts by some bidders to attempt to submit fraudulent information in their tenders, MPTAB was required to conduct a full due diligence on the recommended bidder before approving the recommendations of the evaluators. MPTAB were required to check and confirm the validities of the company's registration and other source documents. And additionally, since they were the entity that had all the historical records on all government procurement awards, it was also their responsibility to ensure that no bidder submitted incorrect previous work experience details.
Mr. David Patterson says the comments by the chairman of the board falsely declared that due diligence was not a requirement in defense of the award of contracts to a new local company.
This comment was made in response to questions pertaining to the award of a contract of $346 million to Statement Investment Inc. for the construction of the Bamia Primary School in Linden. The award to a company that was only registered 6 months ago and has no similar work experience should have immediately made their bid unresponsive based on the tender requirements. This has correctly raised questions on the role of MPTAB.
In the absence of the Public Procurement Commission, NPTAB awards of contracts have come under scrutiny. Public concerns were raised over the decision to award a $346 million contract to Statement Construction for the construction of a primary school at Bamia Region 10. A bipartisan committee set up to resolve existing rifts between a Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change, has left some matters outstanding, including chairmanship and vice chairmanship of Region 4, Demerara Mahaica, controlled by the coalition. General Secretary of the AFC, David Patterson, says the two parties met and resolved several outstanding issues, but some key issues are still not addressed.
The bipartisan committee did submit a report, and I think that they had several recommendations. Some of them are still outstanding, and the primary one, so we were satisfied with the process. We participated quite fully, our members and the APNU members. However, some of the recommendations, including the discussion on the chairmanship of Region 4, have not been resolved.
The AFC is likely to again move a motion of no confidence against the chairman, Daniel Seram, and vice chairman, Samuel Sandy. The AFC's General Secretary says the party is assessing the matter.
Our position is that we will seek further clarification to see what was the errors, if any, even if we have to seek legal opinions or ask the council to seek legal opinions on the validity of motions in general, so that we could be so guided. And after that, we shall make our decisions on what is to be proceeded with.
The AFC Region 4 Demerara Mahaica councillors want the chairman and vice chairman removed from office over claims of poor performance that has led to a loss of jobs and non-payment of persons. The AFC says its councillors have highlighted several grave concerns, including the suspension of the regional administration of committees meetings without informing councillors and the sidelining of the AFC. The AFC has publicly complained about alienation and exclusion of the AFC and its representatives from the Region 4 chairman, who also chairs several key committees, including those on tourism and drainage. Opposition leader Joseph Harmon has criticized the government for its poor handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in Guyana, as he again calls for a unified approach to fighting the pandemic. Mr. Joseph Harmon came out with harsh criticism for the government, with October and November registering the highest COVID deaths in Guyana.
The last 2 months have been our deadliest months, but this government continues to do less by encouraging careless and reckless actions through its COVID-19 measures. You see, not all of us can set up sanitation units in our yards, and therefore the problem we have is that when the government relaxes measures, cover up cases in schools and public offices, cover up and have no monitoring of public transport, relax the curfew, fail to manage COVID-19 hotspots, the perception that is being created is that the virus is no longer as deadly or as contagious.
Mr. Harmon says the inability of the government to devise a plan beyond the vaccination is hurting the vulnerable groups more. He urged citizens to get vaccinated and be responsible.
As we have said before to citizens, over a year now, please take all necessary measures to keep yourselves and your loved ones safe. Continue to wear your mask, sanitize, and wash your hands. Stay away from crowds. Get vaccinated. If you are unsure, get clearance from a doctor. But by all means, get vaccinated. I know food prices are high, but eat as healthy as you can. Vaccines help, and so do our other actions. So I'm urging all citizens to ensure that we take the necessary steps to deal with this COVID-19 virus. The government is doing nothing to help us.
The opposition leader says citizens must now take responsibility for themselves in the absence of prudent action on the part of the government. The director of the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, Dr. Carissa Etienne, says relaxing of COVID measures threatens the gains made to lower COVID infections in the region. Dr. Etienne pointed to Europe, which is experiencing more waves of COVID infections as they relax measures and are now forced to lock down again. She says the Caribbean is vulnerable and following in the path of Europe is inadvisable.
Even though vaccination coverage is not as high as we'd hope, in many densely populated areas, the Americas, preventive measures have been lifted or relaxed. And this is a worrisome combination that keeps us vulnerable to the virus and threatens our hard-fought gains. With the approaching holidays and upcoming summer vacations in the Southern Hemisphere, I wish to take a moment to remind everyone that our individual and collective decisions chart the path of this pandemic.
The PAHO director says the region still falls short of vaccination targets.
While 51% of people across Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, there are 19 countries in our region that have not reached the WHO targets to vaccinate 40% of the population of every country by the end of this year and 70% by mid-2022.
Guyana, as of Tuesday, November 23rd, fully vaccinated 53% of its adult population. Dr. Etienne says the last Christmas season taught a lesson of COVID surge after the holidays and urged people to be responsible during the holidays.
But as we have said time and time again, vaccines are not the only tool to protect us against COVID. And that's why the last point I want to stress is that public health measures are key to reducing the spread of this virus. Mask wearing, social distancing, and avoiding large gatherings, especially indoors, will remain important, even as more of us get vaccinated. There is no room for complacency because we've already faced the consequences of an uncontrolled pandemic, and we don't want to be in that position again.
Dr. Carissa Etienne warned against large gatherings during the Christmas and urged persons to get vaccinated. Guyana has seen a decline in positive cases overall, but is warned by the Ministry of Health that 3 regions, 2, 3, and 8, are still registering high infection rates. The government has adjusted the curfew hours to allow more time for businesses to operate. An East Berbice Quarantine Region 6 55-year-old fully vaccinated male is the lone COVID death recorded in the last 24 hours, taking the death toll to 980. The Health Ministry recorded 79 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. The data shows 12 persons seriously sick and being treated in the COVID intensive care unit. Another 75 persons are hospitalized, while 4 persons are quarantined by the ministry. That is in addition to 1,722 persons who tested positive and were instructed to isolate themselves at home. The ministry says its vaccination program has partially immunized 397,612 adults and 28,874 children ages 12 to 17 years old. There are now 272,701 fully vaccinated adults and 20,075 children ages 12 to 17 years old fully vaccinated. And now in regional news. Spokesperson on education for the Democratic Labour Party, Neil Marshall, says the Ministry of Education must share an alternative plan early should face-to-face classes not resume as planned in January next year. Mr. Neil Marshall, an attorney at law, says that the current infection numbers were trending upwards in all of the country's tourism source markets, which would translate into increased cases in Barbados. According to Nation News, Marshall quoted the World Health Organization, WHO, as saying that coronavirus deaths in Europe rose 5% in the last week, making it the only region in the world where COVID-19 deaths increased. The St. Philip South candidate suggested that, given current global trends, the planned school reopening might not be a practical reality. He listed issues that have plagued the educational system from the inception of the pandemic and which have not been adequately addressed, and gave solutions as to how the government could implement alternative plans, including wider access to internet services, reliable electronic devices, and the provision of food and nutrition. He says too many children still have no devices. He says internet access without a device is like having raw food with no means of cooking it. Marshall emphasized that the Ministry of Education must ensure all school children have access to the necessary electronic devices that would allow them to participate in the online platform. Marshall also suggested that school meal workers not involved with COVID assignments be deployed to provide sustenance to children whose parents were having difficulties. Marshall says it is clear the government have become a law unto itself at the expense of taxpayers, and urge education officials to listen to advice and be more proactive in their approach. Grenadian legislators are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana, as well as allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. Loop News reported that Agriculture Minister Peter Davis is to table the amendment to the Drug Abuse Bill at the upcoming session of Parliament scheduled for Friday. The main objectives of the amendments are to allow anyone over 18 years to be in possession of 28 grams of marijuana, and to allow each homeowner over the age of 18 to grow no more than 5 trees. Rastafarians will be able to use the herb solely for religious purposes, as a sacrament in adherence to the Rastafarian faith, and at a place of worship. Legislation also indicates that, notwithstanding the provisions of the Act, the Minister may, by order, designate any premises or place as a place of worship of the Rastafarian faith for the purposes of this Act. Despite the legislation for people to be in possession of marijuana, smoking in a public place will be prohibited, and a person who smokes or uses cannabis or cannabis resin in a public place commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 EC. The legislation allows the minister to prescribe a list of approved public places where the smoking of cannabis or cannabis resin may be allowed. A person who, whilst under the influence of cannabis, operates, navigates, or is in actual physical control of any motor vehicles, aircraft, or ship, or does anything which contributes negligence, professional malpractice, or professional misconduct, commits an offense and is liable on a summary conviction to a fine of $500 EC. Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held on the better conditions than those of previous contests, the head of a European Union's observation mission said on Tuesday, while declining to say whether the vote was free and fair. A Reuters news report says the Sunday vote was the first time in 4 years the country's opposition has run candidates though it suffered a resounding defeat with the ruling party winning at least 18 out of 23 governorships. The socialist government of President Nicolas Maduro has long faced accusations of anti-democratic practices from the United States and other critics, although the presence of the EU observers was seen by some as conferring a modicum of legitimacy on the process. Maduro has said the observers carried out their mission very well so far, while other senior members of the ruling party referred to observers as peepers and accused them of arriving in the country with a pre-written report. Observers witnessed the use of band-controlled points meant to track which government supporters cast ballots, and structural deficiencies remain. Santos declined multiple times to say whether the vote was free and fair and called for observers' final report not to be used as a political instrument. Some polling places suffered delays in opening and closing times, though voting machines were trustworthy. The National Electoral Authority is more politically balanced than it has been in 20 years, and that balance is key to building public trust, she says. Opposition figures had questioned the fairness of constant coverage of government candidates on state television and the sales of subsidized food ahead of voting. More than 1,000 polling places in 23 states were visited by 136 observers, Santos said, and her team will release a final report in late January or early February. And now for the international news, the latest coming from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Australia is sending a peacekeeping force to the Solomon Islands after a second day of unrest in the capital Honiara. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said they'd be deployed immediately. Anti-government protesters have set fire to buildings and looted shops. Phil Mercer has more details.
The government in the Solomon Islands has said it was still in control, but has asked Australia's help to provide security. It will send troops and police officers. Smoke was seen rising from Honiara's Chinatown district, a day after demonstrators tried to storm the parliament. Police used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds demanding the resignation of the Prime Minister. The unrest has been triggered by allegations of official corruption and disputes over the government's move to more closely align with China.
A military general from the United Arab Emirates who's accused of torture has been chosen as the new president of the international police agency Interpol. General Ahmed Nasser al-Raisi was elected to a 4-year term. Warren Bull reports.
In the past few months, dozens of politicians and rights organisations, including Human Rights Watch, have lobbied against the candidacy of General Ahmed Nasser al-Raisi. They accuse him of heading a security apparatus that they say continues to systematically target peaceful critics in the United Arab Emirates, including the jailed dissident Ahmed Mansour. Allegations of torture have been filed against the general in courts in several countries, including France, where Interpol is based. Critics fear that he might try to use Interpol to go after opposition activists at home and abroad. General Raisi rejects the torture allegations and says he wants to modernise Interpol.
France says a fifth suspect has been arrested following the deaths of 27 migrants on Wednesday who were trying to cross the English Channel to get to Britain. The French government will hold an emergency meeting to discuss how to stop people smugglers sending migrants to the UK. Despite the drownings, there have been further attempts to make the crossing today. 40 migrants have arrived in the southeast of England on 2 boats. At least 8 people have been killed and 17 others injured in a car bomb explosion targeting a UN security convoy in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. From there, Mercy Juma has this report.
Witnesses report a huge explosion, followed by clouds of smoke and then deafening gunfire. The blast occurred near the K4 junction in the heart of Mogadishu. That blast was so intense that it collapsed the walls of nearby schools, the Osman Hospital, and wrecked numerous vehicles. Some of the injured are reported to be school children. The extremist Islamist group Al-Shabaab has claimed the attack. A spokesperson told the Reuters news agency that the target had been a United Nations convoy.
News from the BBC. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has introduced a contentious religious discrimination bill to Parliament, saying it will protect Australians of faith from so-called cancel culture. The bill enshrines the right to make statements of religious belief if deemed to be in good faith, even if these breach existing anti-discrimination laws protecting minority groups. It also allows religious schools to hire staff and admit pupils only from their own faith. 11 people have died in Russia and dozens are trapped after a fire broke out in a Siberian coal mine. The Emergencies Ministry said they were still unsure of the whereabouts of nearly 50 other people who remain underground with no communication following the accident. Nearly 300 people were in the mine when the fire took hold. Pfizer is suing an employee accusing her of stealing confidential company documents, including some on its coronavirus vaccine. The US said Juan Xiao Li downloaded more than 12,000 documents onto personal devices without permission. She's yet to respond publicly to the claims. Here's Andrew Wood.
Pfizer has filed action in a court in California. It says that it believes that she had been offered a job with a rival company and that she downloaded the files while she was serving out a notice or while she was about to leave Pfizer. She even allegedly tried to cover her tracks by coming up with a decoy laptop as well to fool the company into thinking what she'd done with the files.
An Australian medical company has been the focus of unexpected media inquiries after being wrongly accused of doing a deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan to process cannabis. The firm, called Seafarm, in a statement said it had nothing to do with cannabis or the Taliban. BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now to end the news, here is a recap of the leads. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU plus AFC coalition government, David Patterson, accused the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board of failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts. APNU and AFC are still to settle unresolved issues, causing rifts between the two coalition partners. And in regional news, Grenadian parliamentarians are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana and allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held under better conditions, the head of a European Union's observation mission said on Tuesday, but declined to say if the vote was free and fair. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.